As we patiently await the start of the next season of Formula 1 and the inevitable continuation of max domination, we can look back at the insane season that was 2023. With Red Bull winning all races but one last year, the season lacked a narrative that's usually one of the best parts of the sport. However, the rest of the grid was pretty competitive. The second fastest car changed on a seemingly weekly basis, so maybe we can craft a narrative by asking one simple question. What if Red Bull didn't compete in the 2023 F1 season at all? So I've erased Red Bull from every race of the season, bumping everyone else up 1 or 2 places. This of course doesn't take into account how teams would act if wins and championships were on the line, but that's impossible to simulate, so this is the best I've got. Let's immerse ourselves in this alternate reality and recap the 2023 season without Red Bull. The season starts off with one thing, the Alonso hype train. After he replaced the retiring Sebastian Vettel as Aston Martin, rumors emerged that they actually built a fast car this time. And build a fast car they did. Alonso started the year off with a 6-race podium streak, including 4 wins. He even repeated his 2010 feat of winning on debut for his new team in Bahrain, with some excellent racing against the Mercedes. Hamilton would get his first win in over a year in Australia after a race of carnage. Leclerc and Ferrari remembered who they were in Baku and dominated both the sprint and Grand Prix, but Alonso finished runner-up in both cases. He really couldn't be stopped. His 4th victory of the season in Monaco was as dominant as it can get. Even a strategy blunder of putting dries on while Monte Carlo was about to be flooded couldn't stop him from winning the race comfortably ahead of, surprisingly, his old teammate Esteban Ocon. So after round 6, Alonso was leading the championship comfortably, being a whopping 44 points ahead of Hamilton, ironically enough. Despite his dominant Baku weekend, Leclerc's inconsistent start to the season meant he was behind both his teammate and Russell, whose far more consistent results placed them 3rd and 4th. The constructors' standings were pretty tight on the other hand, mostly thanks to Lance getting just a single podium so far. That might have been due to his injury before preseason testing, but it wasn't a good look on him. So while Aston Martin was still leading, they only had an 11-point margin over Mercedes and 47 points over Ferrari. Meanwhile, Alpine found themselves in a bit of a no man's land, clearly faster than the back of the grid, but far behind the regular podium sitters. Their civil warfare in Australia certainly didn't help. The back of the grid was, as expected, mostly scrapping over single-digit points finishes. Alonso's podium streak came to an end in his home race, which allowed Lewis to catch up slightly by taking home full points. Not that Fernando would be deterred by that, he won the next race in Canada, widening the gap again. And it would get wider still in Austria, as Lewis had a terrible weekend, scoring just 9 points across the sprint and Grand Prix combined, although the win would go to Leclerc again, being consistently inconsistent. Worryingly for the Alonso hype train, the Aston Martin started to lose pace, while both Mercedes kept being consistent, with Lewis getting 3 straight second places in a row, which resulted in them stealing the lead in the Constructors' Championship and building a fairly comfortable lead. Charles for some reason kept being strong on sprint weekends, winning ahead of Lewis in Belgium, but before that, we got a new first-time winner in Britain, and his name was Lando Norris. Out of nowhere, McLaren brought some upgrades that catapulted them up the order. While they had a dreadful start to the season, being just barely ahead of the other backmarkers, they all of a sudden got a 2nd place finish in Austria and 2 back-to-back double podiums immediately afterwards in Britain and Hungary, taking the win both times with Norris. All of a sudden, the fastest car on the grid was the McLaren. They shot past Alpine in the constructor standings in these 3 weekends and kept climbing higher. So, come the summer break, Alonso held on to his lead, but people were getting worried about the Aston Martin's recent lack of pace. Hamilton was just 18 points behind, and the fight was now firmly between those two. 3rd place Leclerc a whole 61 points behind Lewis. He would realistically need to focus on keeping that place, having only gained it in Belgium from his teammate, with Russell also being in the fight for 3rd. The lead in the Constructors' Championship already slipped out of Aston Martin's hands, Mercedes taking a firm 42-point lead and Ferrari creeping in at just 23 points behind Aston. McLaren meanwhile was still far behind due to their start of season struggles, but their points tally was climbing rapidly. The backmarkers weren't separated by much, with Williams edging out Alfa Romeo by 1 point for 6th in the standings. Aston Martin was losing out against its rivals in the development race, but Fernando Alonso was still Fernando Alonso, getting an insane win in the wildest of conditions in the Netherlands. The Tifosi dream came true in the next round at Monza, Ferrari taking a front row lockout and converting it into 1-2. They dominated their home race and even put on a show between them, a tight battle for the lead between the 2 Ferraris, with Carlos Sainz coming out on top to take his first win of the season. Sainz carried his momentum straight into Singapore, leading what was a fairly dull race before a safety car allowed Merck to switch to an alternate strategy and chase down the Ferrari and the McLaren of Norris. The Mercs had the pace to take victory, but Sainz used Norris to defend his place, which gave him his 2nd win in a row, while Russell binned it into the wall on the last lap, handing his teammate the last step on the podium in the process. The power balance would shift again. This time it was McLaren's turn to finish 1-2. Twice in a row in fact. Norris taking the win in Japan and Piastri becoming the newest F1 race winner in Qatar, winning both the sprint and the Grand Prix. Both Lewis and Fernando struggled to score points in these two rounds, just 17 and 18 points respectively, Lewis especially throwing away a potential podium or even a win in Qatar by crashing into his teammate. He would stand on the top step of the podium at the next race in Austin, which after 18 races finally put him into the lead of the championship.
But then!
The FIA inspected a few cars for plank wear, and Lewis's W14 failed, leading to a costly disqualification. Somehow Alonso was clinging onto the lead. The win in the US would instead go to Norris, making it a hat-trick of wins for the papaya outfit. With 4 races to go, Alonso was miraculously still leading the championship. Since his win in Zandvoort, he couldn't get onto the podium again and even failed to score twice, but he still topped the standings, though just by 3 points. Aston Martin had lost the development race. It seemed inevitable that he'd lose the lead, but he still held on. Meanwhile, Norris had shot past Russell and Leclerc, leaving him 4th in the standings behind Sainz. The gap between 3rd and 6th was just 36 points. This could get as tight, if not tighter than the fight for the championship. The downfall of Aston Martin could clearly be seen on the constructors' standings, almost flatlining after the summer break. Mercedes and Ferrari were getting ready to fight it out for the constructors' title, and McLaren just burst through the 300-point mark, getting dangerously close to Aston Martin in P3. Lewis would finish P1 again in Mexico, and this time it stuck. It was a long time coming, but now he finally took the lead of the Drivers' Championship, and with Fernando Alonso not finishing the race, it immediately turned into a quite firm lead. Weirdly, it was now the Mercedes' time to suddenly lose pace, falling behind both the McLaren and the Aston Martin in Brazil, where both Alonso and somehow Lance Stroll found themselves on the podium, where Lando Norris took the only maximum point sprint weekend of the season. Leclerc would win a surprisingly fun race in Las Vegas, and the stage was set for the season finale. Hamilton led the Drivers' Championship by 21 points over Alonso, who was the only one still with a mathematical chance of taking it away from Lewis. So Alonso needed to win with Hamilton 8th without the fastest lap or lower, or win with the fastest lap and Hamilton 7th or lower. Not the chances you'd want if you are Alonso. Mercedes and Ferrari were separated by just 8 points, meaning both teams could easily win the Constructors' Championship. McLaren has gotten insanely close to Aston Martin in 3rd place, although Lance Stroll's recent uptick in performance, alongside his teammate consistently delivering, has kept their team there. So going into the final round, McLaren was 25 points behind. Alpine was stuck in no man's land, and the backmarker teams needed miracles to change their positions. That covers all the stakes heading into Abu Dhabi. That miracle almost came for AlphaTauri. Yuki Tsunoda hilariously leading the race briefly during the pit stop shuffle. In the end, Leclerc won the race, denying Alonso the opportunity to make one last lunge at the championship, although Lewis finished 7th anyways, giving him his record-breaking 8th World Championship. Leclerc's victory also gave him 3rd place in the Drivers' Championship, although with Sainz having his only non-scoring weekend of the season, it was not enough to make Ferrari the Constructors' Champions. Mercedes could earn another double championship thanks to Russell finishing 2nd. Well, that certainly was a season. It's hilarious, at least I think so, that removing the most dominant team and driver we've seen, potentially ever, just ends up creating yet another season where Mercedes and Hamilton stand tall. Although at least he didn't cruise to this title like he did so many times before, being behind his old teammate for the vast majority of the season. Despite not winning the title, Alonso and Aston Martin were the spine of this season, dominating the first half, falling behind the other teams and making one last lunge forwards at the end. Everything seemingly revolved around them. This was definitely an interesting experiment, and if it has taught us anything, it's that even when Max inevitably runs away with the title again this year, it's worth keeping an eye out for the stories that lurk just behind. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this fantasy as entertaining as I did. I wanted to get some content out during the off-season, but this took so long to edit that testing starts, tomorrow. But it's so satisfying to see this video come together, and I'm so glad I got to finish it. Well, see you in Bahrain.